Let's see. Good afternoon. This is the Leon Trotsky Revolutionary News Letter and Podcast with Connor Exum, and my guest today is Greg Giorgio from Altamont, New York, and he's also a member of the International Industrial Workers of the World, also known as the Wobblies. And he's been in everything from broadcast and reporter, producer, to delegate of the Wobblies in the region, right? Let's see. Now, how do I? Yeah, there you go. Okay. Can we hear you?
I hope so.
Yes.
Very
using
good.
a new system today, folks. So please excuse any possible interactions that we have that seem a little wonky. So, as a wobbly,
Yes.
I mean, you're one of the oldest industrial unions in the country. That's across the board. It's not specific. I mean, obviously,
Yes.
the other unions are older, but they were very specific to which industry. You were across the board. All members of the industry could join. Anyone can join the IWW.
That's true. And our watchwords were one big union. We wanted to organize the working class into one single force that could challenge capital and its oppressive nature by creating the concept of an injury to one is an injury to all, and be able to use the industrial strength of industries rather than the individualized crafts of the industries.
Right. And now the big question is, we're seeing a big movement in the labor right now. Do they have the power they need to really get it done, to cross the line?
Well, I think we're seeing some good signs. I think the short term answer is, you know, uh, because of the evolution of the whole political realm in our country and in the really the capitalist culture. After all,
Mm-hmm.
we have become more and more. We have become less and less powerful as working class people, whether we're in unions or not. And so, and even though a lot of us have been involved in formal labor unions, um, I think you and a lot of your subscriber listeners know
Mm-hmm.
that we're looking at a labor movement which, really since the end of World War II, you pass Taft-Hartley and you get one aspect that makes it easier to sign on and become a union member, but all of the rest of it becomes more difficult. The employer has all the advantages in the legal sense, and thus, uh, a non-progressive labor movement as we've developed in our country. If you look at the unions in many other countries, they still have more of a class conscious view of what capital and labor are, what their interests are. They don't agree, as most of our labor movement seems to preach, that labor and capital have very much in common. So, uh, in the short term, I think we're really still challenged a lot, but we're seeing some very nice signs, some very promising signs of how people can react to this historic oppression of working people, and it's very encouraging to know that the workers that are in the lower paid jobs and the service industry jobs are the ones that are really making the difference right now.
That is true, but what I'm worried about in that respect, about the service industry especially, is the ability to automate so effectively now.
Well, that's a huge point. That's a huge point, and um, those of us who have any kind of decision making power on the labor side have really got to be looking at uh, what our what our future is going to be like if automation keeps advancing to take people's jobs away. In the most simplistic terms, you can't just walk in and smash a machine. uh, but
They tried
but
in
there are
England.
other ways. There are other ways to do it.
Well, but I mean, there's a lot of problems I see with the automation, especially for the service industry. I mean, let's look at Europe. They are pushing hard in Europe to create automated coffee kiosks. Much harder here than they are there than they are here right now. I and that's going to definitely affect our Starbucks union fight in the long run. And then we have the
Yeah.
trains. They're trying to automate trains more, so we know that that's going to affect the train union in 2 years when they're back up for reassessing their contract.
Right, because they had a long struggle just to get to the lousy deal that they ended up getting. So they'll be back at the bargaining table in no time. Yeah, it's very interesting. Starbucks is a very upfront example of what's been going on
Mm-hmm.
in the modern uprising of service industry workers. And um, our union was the first in the United States to get involved with trying to organize Starbucks. Now, in all honesty, we didn't have a lot of luck at it, but we did educate a lot of workers about what some of the problems were and what some of the challenges were. And Howard Schultz, the guy that runs Starbucks, is an absolute sociopath. I don't know if you've ever seen him speak to his
Oh, I
workers.
have
You've seen some of these
the great speech.
videos that,
The speech he gave where he compared unions to concentration camps in Buffalo.
well, I saw the quote about that. Yeah, I didn't actually see that lecture, but I saw another one. And he really is a crybaby for his wealthy privilege, and he really does not get it. He doesn't get that if you pay people a living wage and treat them
Mm-hmm.
with some systemic fairness, that they'll actually do better work for you. But that's not the point. The main point is that he's a symptom, and it's a systemic problem where we're talking about the lack of worker control.
Definitely, and I think that's one thing that the American union movement really misses. They want representation in the system, but they don't go for the control. They don't go for let's have 50% on the board, not some measly 30% where you're always voted down. Let's have it right down the middle.
Well, and again, I mentioned
The
the sort of
used to fight for that a lot.
yeah. I think in a lot of ways, we sort of think of ourselves as the conscience
Mm-hmm.
of the labor movement. We're a pretty small union. We only have about 9,000 paid members in North America. And we do have British European, and Australian administrations too. But, the idea that we're always just fighting a private ownership versus the employees versus the workers that are working for that entity is a big problem, and we need more control, and we need more worker ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually maybe we'll get the keys to all those factories and workplaces.
It seems to me that's where we should be, especially going in the Starbucks route. I mean, because that job can be so easily automated right now. I mean, if you go through the internet, there's a company out in California that's creating Flippy the hamburger robot.
Yep.
And as I
Yeah,
said,
McDonald's has already delved into this, right?
So we're seeing that synergy between technology and the owners again. And, for a little while, we had a period where they were down on automation. They were saying, well, it's not working. But now, because of the pandemic, they're back up. They're saying, look, we need automation. We need to cut costs where we can because of the supply chain issues. And I think that we have to push for, it's not enough just to have a union. It's that we want to control what really goes on in each of these places.
One thing that I think is worth mentioning going back to the railroad
Hmm.
struggle, um, it's while it's not the best answer, it is a step in the right direction. Um, some people in the railroad unions, and particularly the Progressive Caucus, Railroad Workers United,
Mm.
uh, and some other organizations who support their agenda, like Solutionary Rail. I don't know if you're familiar with that. A lot of
I,
people probably aren't, but
mhm.
it's worth looking up and investigating. They're calling for public ownership of the rail system, the entire rail system, not just the freight railroads, but the whole system across the board with the passenger systems as well. And, that would be a huge step in the right direction. While it's not the most radical transformation, it is a reform that I think would improve the lives of the workers.
Oh, I think it'd be an incredible. You take the profit motive out of it, you're going to see a lot of improvements across the board. Safety improvements for the employees and the freight number. I mean, like the airlines want to go down to one pilot now, so the rail want to go to one engineer on a train that's a mile and a half or more long, and that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's just a poor public policy in
Mhm.
terms of safety. And there's an economic fact about transportation systems is that they're not really profitable in the long run. Um, even the railroads themselves have turned into stockholder cash machines. They're not really making most of their money, or they're making a lot less of their money. Let's put it that way. In actually goods and services transport, what they're doing is they're doing stock buybacks, and they're turning their revenue into further banking systems for their stockholders, larger banking systems for their stockholders. Um, we have to stop. We can't allow that to go on.
No, but we didn't. I mean, that was a 1980s invention, basically. I mean, that was all illegal. These stock buybacks in the 70s would have been considered stock manipulation and you would have gone to jail. But
Yep.
then Reagan got in, he loosened the regulations, deregulated the SEC a little.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, we've got companies like Uber, which has never shown a profit. And yet its stock is worth, I don't know what it is today, but I mean, it's usually worth over $200 at any time, and it has
Yep.
$60 billion in loss, and it's impossible to explain that other than continued stock buybacks and the exploitation of the drivers.
Yep. Yeah. It's really every time you turn around, there's a worse scheme being developed, and bad for the workers, but bad for service too.
Mm-hmm.
Bad for the services that are provided. And that's nowhere more evident right now than on the freight rail system.
Yes, the freight railroad system is a problematic situation all across the board, from the top to the bottom. But what are you seeing that the workers? Because I noticed in your write up you gave me, you've been doing a lot for the railroad. Bringing out their.
I'm a solidarity member of Railroad Workers United, as well as being involved in the IWW and other like local labor
Mm-hmm.
stuff that I get involved with outside of my union. Um, because I have some friends in the rail industry, a couple of whom were also Wobblies.
Wow.
Um, I proposed a while back to the who was then the then secretary of RWU,
Mm-hmm.
Ron Kamenko,
Mm-hmm.
who's now their lead organizer.
Mm-hmm.
I asked him if he and the organization would be interested in getting an audio feed of their weekly News Digest web page email that they send out every Tuesday morning. So the steering committee met and got back to me within a few days and said, let's give it a trial run. Let's do an audio test and see how it works for us. And so since the beginning of 2022, we have been uh, giving them a weekly audio recap of their News Digest.
Well, that's great. I mean, that really helps. That broadens your audience, even in the union, to far people that maybe don't have the time to actually read it, but they can put it on their iPod and go to work and have the earbuds in
Yeah.
and listen to it. I myself am a Teamster from UPS,
Okay.
so not in good standing because I left a long time ago and I forgot to fill out the card, so I probably owe a ton of dues.
Well,
But once a Teamster, always a Teamster.
the first union I had, very serious formal contact with was a Teamsters local here in the Albany area. And even though my workplace was not organized by the Teamsters, I developed some early ties with them.
Yeah,
And one of my best buddies, a mentor of mine who's no longer with us, was a dual card member of the Teamsters in the IWW, and he was a real warrior for the working class. He's the person I admire most in the labor movement.
wow. Yeah, the Teamsters were a great union. I mean, I can't complain. It was a part-time job during college when I was in Louisville, and you got health benefits, you got overtime after 5. I mean, they literally fought so hard that we got overtime after 5 hours because UPS, as you may know, loves to exploit workers by always using part-time labor for the majority of
Sure.
their jobs. So
Oh yeah.
to offset that, we got a lot of overtime and a lot of perks that other part-time people wouldn't get, and that was great. So I'm always pro-union, even if sometimes it does, fail a little. But I mean, for the most part, you get more benefits than losses with it.
Well, it's always a good start, and then of course the problem always being the watchword is union democracy.
Yes.
Staying involved in what your union is actually doing on the ground to help you and your coworkers, and that really is, you are the union.
That is my one complaint from my time at the Teamsters is that they were very isolated, locked in. You were the rank and file, and the other committees were, they were the elected people. They were either long-time, full-time employees of other companies that were part of our local 89 in Louisville, Kentucky, or they were, hired from outside and brought in with supposed union, ties. And some of them didn't have it. You could tell. They just didn't have the fight. It was just another corporate job for them. And that's really where we have to do a radical change within the union system ourselves. But, that takes effort.
Yeah. Education. The unions themselves can do a lot in that regard. When you bring a new member in, that's one of the things that we try to work real hard at, especially in our local branch here in the upstate New York area, is that we do organizer trainings about twice a year, but we also have some new member orientation materials, and we also our older, more experienced members. We do a lot of phone calls or in-person stuff. Of course, COVID has corrupted that a bit, but we take it very seriously that a new member should be nurtured, and should receive a certain amount of encouragement and education at the outset. And let me tell you that a lot of people who join the IWW right off the rip are people who already have a lot of experience in the activist culture or in workplace organizing type stuff. So in many cases, we're lucky we don't have to do much with them.
Well, that is a plus. I mean, the other unions do get a wider spectrum of individuals who join up, and for different reasons. Sometimes just because you have to, like at UPS, it was a closed shop and you had to. That was it.
Sure.
I mean, and that always produces a lot of friction.
Now,
Unfortunately,
it can, sure.
I mean, and that was probably part of the reason why the Taft-Hartley left that in to build that friction within the union movement.
Yeah, it needs to be repealed.
Well, it could be. I mean, every time a Democratic Congress gets in, they have the ability to do it. With the president, they just refuse to. I mean, they could have done it. I mean, Truman could have done it in the next Congress. He had control. But he didn't.
No. No, Harry was not good on those issues.
No, he wasn't. And, I mean, unfortunately, I think the big massive strikes of 45 and 46 had soured a lot of people.
Unfortunately, yes, but you can understand it from what the mood of the country was like coming out of the war. There was a lot of course, that was a political victory for those who waved the finger at labor and said, "Well, how dare you?
Mm-hmm.
How dare you fight now after, all this struggle the whole country has been through? Please,
Mm-hmm.
But that was a simplistic argument for a complex issue. And working people are, we're right to be reacting the way they're reacting. They made the sacrifices to win the war. And Taft-Hartley was really a knife in the back.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it was also, but I mean, I think the public accepted it because they took the more radical socialist elements out of the unions when they did that.
That certainly was part of the agenda.
And so that killed all the really hardcore syndicalists and socialists that were in the IWW, the auto union, the steelworkers union. They got thrown out, branded communists, and done.
Yeah, you had all these pledges that you had to sign with most of the unions. I think there were only a couple of unions that didn't do it. The UE was one, and we were another one.
Yes, but the UE took a hard hit during that period.
They certainly did. They certainly did.
So what's going on right now in New York, in upstate New York? We have strikes. I know about the strikes at the Starbucks in Niskayuna. They were trying to mobilize.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. Our local area has seen the Albany Central Federation of Labor is a much more progressive arm of the AFL type unions than you normally see, and they have been helping do some solidarity work and other support work for quite a few organizing drives. St. Joseph's House, which is a homeless facility. There's a local food security organization which organized and is getting a lot of pushback from management. So they do help create community gardens, and they do food distribution for the poor and so on and so forth. Of course, the local area in recent years has seen a huge amount of support for nursing organizing at Albany Med. Our own IWW branch has gotten involved with not only direct workplace organizing, but other community organizing, like tenant organizing is a project we're working on right now. We have an arm of our union that we call the what do we call it? The General Defense Committee. And the General Defense Committee works on community projects very often, things like emergency medical training for protests. For instance, when the Black Lives Matter protests heated up after George Floyd's murder, we were out on the streets with emergency medical teams. Narcan training for street drug problems. And of course, the IWW's had a long affiliation with food insecurity stuff. We've worked with Food Not Bombs. There isn't currently much going on with that in the Albany area. That tends to wax and wane. But, things that have to do with mutual aid, we're always on the ball with that. We currently have, it's still hush-hush because we don't have enough forward movement on it yet, but we have a tech sector job place organizing drive going on right now
Well,
that
that would be
hasn't gone public yet.
wow. Thanks for telling
Hasn't
us
gone
ahead.
public.
That's that seems to be the big sector that's really making inroads right now. I mean,
And we've got, I would say there are at least 4 or 5 different workplaces that we've been in touch with in the last 5 or 6 months, 6, 7 months. We've had a lot of conversations. Some of them I know probably will never end up having a formal union in the workplace, but we've already helped internal organizers who are
mhm.
members of our union improve some things through some consultation that we've done with them on organizing strategies.
Wow.
So we're always paying attention and we're always working on something, even if it isn't a huge thing.
Well, that's great to hear because if you listen to the normal everyday news in the area, you would think that labor is pretty much either striking at Starbucks or doing nothing at all.
Yeah, or there have been the stories about Amazon
Hmm.
and some of the different things like that. But yeah, that is part of the problem with the perception that you get from the mainstream press, obviously.
Hmm. I mean, I don't think I've seen a pro labor reporter in the Times Union in about 20 years, maybe 30. And that would be back to when I was like 12 years old. I mean, because I'm only
Well, you're right.
42.
You're absolutely right. And the funny thing is that at one time, in our local branch, we had a city news desk
Mhm.
editor working at the Times Union,
Mhm.
who was a member of the Writers Guild and the IWW, and also at the Schenectady Gazette. The same thing.
Wow.
They both had the same kind of jobs, working at the city desk as an editor, and they were members of the union. Uh, but they one moved away and one passed away.
Well, that's what happened. And, let's be honest. Local print news has taken a beating.
Yes, well, the nature of the industry, the evolution of the internet has changed how newspapers are functioning. It's largely been negative for newspapers. Print newspapers are trying to diversify as fast as they can.
Hmm.
And they can't generate the kind of advertising revenue and subscription money that they used to be able to get out of readers, and so they're desperate. Um, Online publications are also competing with newspapers. The things that didn't used to have nuts and bolts, newsprint
Hmm.
are publishing online. New types of publications that are also competing. So it's tough for newspapers.
So, yeah,
And
but that also adversely affects your reporting, right? You're going to pick only the one topics that are going to get you the maximum amount from a business perspective. And it's the same way with the
Mhm.
local news, television news.
Oh, absolutely.
Ever since that in the 1970s when they figured out, the snow, the weather, and whether or not it's a body on the ground were the two biggest things, that's what they go with.
Yep. It's a pretty sad statement on how the news works, and it's really become uh, entertainment,
Mm.
infotainment. It's not a
Especially
new term.
especially now that, our what is it, Channel 6, which would be the CBS affiliate, is owned by, oh God, I can't think of that company, Sinclair.
Sinclair. Yep.
I mean, they're one of the top producers of the faux commercial news segment.
They are.
And they
They
love
are.
to squeeze those in wherever they can.
They
And
do it. Yep. It's pretty disgusting to watch an entire newscast of theirs,
I don't think
and they're
I've.
not that much different from
Oh, no.
most.
No, everyone's doing it. They just happen to be nationwide one of the largest companies that does it.
Yeah.
And they've been hitting, and they definitely don't want a labor reporter on theirs because they're terrible to their labor, no matter what the staff is.
Well, a large part of my training in my secondary education and the college time that I did was, as a sports reporter, a broadcast
Mhm.
journalist. I went to a radio television specialty school, um, and I spent 2 years on the radio there reporting on sports.
Mhm.
And so, when I see both in print and in the broadcast end of it, when I see certain types of coverage, I cringe because the standards have really become they've shredded them to fit the local the modern, I should say, broadcast style, which is so superficial in so many cases. We had a pleasant we actually had a pleasant surprise back in December. About a month ago, the IWW locally organized a solidarity rally for railroad workers
Oh, yes, I saw that. I was out of town.
on a national call for
Mhm.
support. And we actually had uh, two one television station, one newspaper, and one radio station cover it quite well.
That's incredible.
And it was better than usual. They actually seemed to have been quite objective about the story,
Well, that's good.
and that was a pleasant surprise. One of the rare ones.
Was the radio station by any chance an NPR affiliate?
No, it was not. It was
I'm just
actually
surprised.
the NPR affiliate didn't show up.
Mm,
It was the local indie media station that
okay.
operates out of Troy,
All right, I
and
know
they
that
have a
one.
network. They have about 4 stations, so they even though their um, their coverage is not that far as their
Mm.
on air coverage, they're on the internet, so they reach a lot of people now.
Oh, that's great. I was just curious because I couldn't see anybody from the other stations, which are all Cumulus Media or um, iHeart Media, and they're just, I love
Yeah,
when you drive through town and you switch the station and you get the same song on each one.
it's true.
And it's
Yeah, it's been pretty boring.
you think to yourself, wow, that's the A&R guy from the 1970s Dream.
That's right.
But I mean, we have all those problems. But did you guys have anything to do with the newspaper strikes that were going on? I thought there was a newspaper striking. Was it Schenectady's? Was it the Schenectady Gazette?
Well, there were some rumblings about that, but I never. If something happened, I was not privy to that information,
Hmm.
Connor. So I have to plead ignorance.
Oh, I saw it on Twitter, and then I reached out to them, but they never reached back to me, so I never really got a full story.
Well, the Gazette is a non-union paper.
And
The typographical union still runs their press, but yeah, that would be a surprise to me that something's going on there. But nonetheless, I hope so.
I thought maybe there was still. Maybe I got it wrong. I only saw a little blurb on the internet on Twitter, and then I sent a message to them, and they never responded. So it kind of got lost in the ether of everything else that's there, which is great for sometimes, but it magnifies the worst elements usually. That kind of social media.
Well, certainly, yeah. I
Uh,
try to avoid it.
yeah, unfortunately though, when you want to get your message out quickly to people, it's often the only way to do it.
Well, we do use it as a union to publicize events. Yes.
Right. I mean, in fact, but to get someone to contact me from the IWW, I actually had to go to local sources like you. I went to the head source first, the main headquarters, and they never responded.
Well,
But I tend,
not a lot of paid staff.
but I tend to be persistent, so I figured I'd find somebody on the ground who probably had my answers that I wanted.
Well, yeah, I think we really are an activist union, and
Mhm.
so when you contact people in local areas and local branches, you'll find people that can help you.
And I did. and that's what I figured I would. So what's the plan for this year in the IWW really right now?
I mean, as far as the greater union, or
I mean, just locally.
well, our upstate branch has had an interesting evolution in terms of recent history.
Mm-hmm.
So we went from having, a scattered couple of dozen members in more than a few counties,
Mm-hmm.
because our jurisdiction geographically is unusual uh, compared to most of the typical IWW branches. We have a good swath of the eastern half of upstate New York, and so we now have many times more members than that. And so our task is, a lot of it is internal, and trying to get these new members orientated, get them to take an organizer training as soon as
Mm-hmm.
they can, um, and to be answering their calls for help. In the meantime, we're working on developing. As I said, there's some rumblings with tenant organizing. Um,
Now, Hochul has spent a lot of the money of our so-called relief with her friends in the retail and retail realty and marketing and all the commercial r- units. So, what's going on there exactly? Are there a lot more evictions in the future in the Albany area?
there was a wave of them not too
Mm.
long ago. Yeah, it's pretty clear that she's been lobbied hard by the commercial real estate people and chambers of
Mm.
commerce, who are very tight with the local real estate
Mm-hmm.
companies that buy and sell homes. Um, so her call to loosen zoning and stuff is a dog whistle
Now,
uh,
is she loosening
for raising real estate prices.
is she loosening the zoning on commercial, or is she doing it on the housing so that you can have micro rentals, the new
Well,
Airbnb?
she talked about housing. She's
Uh,
talking about family homes, and
because I was so
homes that would be subdivided
mm,
into apartments, obviously.
because I was so surprised last time I was up in Albany, which was about a month ago. I was down on what is it, just off North Pearl, and they put up a whole lot of what looks like upper class rental units on North Pearl. Which, if you know the area, anyone in my audience, it's not really the most fabulous area to go to.
Right.
And so I can't quite understand what's going on there. I can't see who's going to come for a lovely night on North Pearl Street. But clearly
Well,
somebody's got to be.
if I could figure out what's in the head of those real estate developers, I'd be a genius, I guess. But
Would you understand my questioning there? I mean, it's what are you doing?
well, from a viewpoint of where folks like us are coming
Mm-hmm.
from, uh, to hear what we heard the other day in that State of the State address,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's really a matter of poorly arranged priorities about where people who work for wages are going to live and how they're going to pay their rent. But we're talking about a system that doesn't care about that very much.
Oh, definitely.
But in terms of answering your previous question, one of the things that we need to do, and we feel strongly about, um, working people do not have very much access to working class culture
Mm-hmm.
anymore. What passes for it is really not class conscious culture. And so, one of the things that we want to do which is something I think we did more of in the past, which we've gotten away from a little bit, is we want to create more, opportunities for working people to gather
Mhm.
and to share some common bonds through some working class entertainment. We want to create a speakers bureau, um, and I'm talking about that's generated locally. I'm not talking about the greater union from around the country in North America necessarily, even though that is also an idea that's been floated but not well developed. So,
I
if
like keeping
if
it local. I like the idea of keeping it
yeah,
local. It makes it more
yeah,
connected to each other.
the things that the IWW has always done best were things that were local initiatives.
Hmm.
The free speech fights out on the West Coast back in the first 10 years of the Union or so, those kinds of things. Um, and so, yeah, those are projects that are all sort of, you know, in the works. Um, but the ongoing orientation of new members and education stuff is really big for us because we've gained so many new members in the last really in about a year's time.
Wow,
In a year we've more than doubled the upstate New York IWW membership, and so
that's incredible.
that's a burden on us to keep the information flow going.
That's truly incredible and very and that really lifts my hopes up for the IWW
Well, I
and
think
unionism in general.
I think our message and our accessibility is there because we can accept somebody as a member even if they're not tied to a workplace organizing thing
Hmm.
yet. That makes it easier for them to become a union member.
Yes, it does.
And so, we like to say organize the worker before you organize the job.
There's something to be said for that. Then you have a very strong, democratic union in that case if you do it right. And I think the IWW has always been the most democratic of the unions.
When it
Without,
when it works hard at it.
yeah. Well, I mean,
Yes,
every union
absolutely.
goes through
Yeah,
periods,
fundamentally our structure is very democratic. Yep.
and that's very important. I mean, that's what alienates so many people from from a union like the Teamsters, and which is why their big push now has been that yes, we got a guy from the rank and file to be president now, and we're going to have a totally different culture from the top to the bottom. It's not going to be the cousin of Jimmy Hoffa. 'Cause,
Yes.
it would,
Yeah.
and I hope it works because I mean UPS has been grinding down that union for the last 20 years since I left.
Yeah, I've we've got a couple of UPS workers that are members of the IWW in our
Mm.
branch, and I've heard more stories about the continuing grinding, as you say.
Oh, it was horrible when I worked there. I mean they despised the fact that they had to have the union there, the upper management,
Hmm.
and that hostility was palpable at times when they would come in. But what are you going to do? I mean, it was still the best. It was still the best system that we had as employees to have that union, even though we were. It was not quite democratic enough, and it didn't engage us completely. It did look out for most of our needs, even as part timers.
No, and as you had mentioned earlier, it's always better to step into a workplace that has a union in place, and there are always details that can be worked on. It's not just about contract time. It's about the day-to-day, maintenance of your rights and privileges that you should have.
Most definitely. But so your union's growing, and where is it growing most? Which sectors in the region? Because we're getting a lot of tech jobs right now in the Albany area, and a lot of
Um,
service.
there are some. I would still say that it's mainly service industry people. people working in retail, people working in food service.
Hmm.
Um, and you know that is reflective of what's going on with some of the the larger successes that the union has had. For instance, the oldest tenant organization in New York City has a union that was
Yes.
organized by the IWW. Moe's Books out in Berkeley, California, got a first contract with a $20 an hour starting wage. Pretty darn good for retail these days.
It's good.
Not necessarily for the Bay Area, but they've actually got dental coverage as part of that agreement.
That's incredible.
Um,
That is incredible. I mean, when you look at something like our so-called health care program in New York State, dental's not covered for anyone in any one of the
no,
policies.
no, that was a very surprisingly positive development for a new contract, for a first contract. And you know, it's not just limited to the service
Mhm.
industries. There's a In California they have what they call public charter schools,
Yes.
and there's a school system out of Richmond, California, also in the Bay Area.
Hmm.
We organized 196 teachers and staff on 2 campuses for that public charter.
Wow. They must have
Um,
loved you.
well, again, uh, you know, uh, it was a 2 year struggle. It started at the beginning of the pandemic,
Oh, that might have helped.
so I'm telling you that was a real major win.
Oh no, I'm not saying
Um,
it wasn't. That's what I was saying is that the charter schools are designed to circumvent
yes,
any union involvement at
yep.
all. So that's why I was saying that it must have been a real struggle to get in there and get anyone to even take you seriously at first.
Another area that the union has been making some inroads with is with freelance writers
Nice.
out of New York City based organizing, and and that is something that I think will probably continue to grow across the union's membership.
Well, that's part of
Uh,
the
I've
stigma.
I, I've worked as a freelance
Mhm.
writer myself in the past, um, and I would, if you'll excuse me just 1 second.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no
Um,
problem.
and I know that having had been a member of the National Writers Union,
Hmm.
I know that I was always frustrated by the lack of teeth that we had to try to enforce some standards. There were people that I worked for in the publishing industry that just refused to recognize the contract provisions that NWU was trying to work on, and the guidelines that were provided, and so it was voluntary,
Hmm.
and they really had no follow up beyond the personal pressure that you yourself could apply for the most part. And so I think this freelance organizing campaign fills a big gap, um, uh, and especially with internet stuff. There's a lot more opportunities for writers, but they're very low paid.
Yes. So let's talk about that for a second because that breaks sort of the stigma that unions always have about being, on the low paid, low skilled level, basically, or skilled work, but low educational. Now you're seeing that unions can and should support, people that are traditionally considered white collar workers. And I think that's very important that we're seeing more drives into these normally white collar fields because there's exploitation there as well.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of workers are told that they're professionals.
Right.
Uh, I've had some experience from the outside looking in at some many workers that are employed um, in the healthcare field where it's not considered, shall we say, kosher
Hmm.
to try to organize your workplace because you're a professional. Well, uh, these workers in a lot of these jobs, some of it was in the mental health
Hmm.
field, some of it was in other aspects of medical. Um, they just don't. They don't have anything different that goes on in their workplaces than any other person who works in a
Hmm.
factory or any other kind of job does who traditionally might
Yeah.
be seeking union representation. They were just told a different message and were somehow people were able to swallow that and accept it. But again, uh, in the IWW, we feel that any worker
Hmm.
that is not involved in management making decisions and can hire and fire should be a member of the union.
And I agree. I mean, that is very important in this whole scheme of things. Otherwise, you're at the mercy of the corporation.
Yep.
So what else? So we were talking about that. So let's get to the internet, because we're seeing. Are you there? Oh, I didn't expect that. Going completely black when you muted yourself. You're still muted. You've muted yourself, and now I can't hear you. No. Let's get this. You're gonna have to unmute it on your end. Somehow you've muted yourself. Nope. Can you hear me? All right, but I can't hear you. How about you? How about we? How about we log out and then log back in, and then we can see if that'll work. Pardon the technical difficulty. It's a new system, and my guest has just muted himself. Hopefully, this will fix the problem. Can you hear me?
Can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you. We solved
Yeah,
it.
I'm sorry about that. For some reason, the local iPhone iPad thing, somebody made a FaceTime call request
Oh,
and it knocked us off. So sorry
so
about that.
oh, understand completely. But what I was saying is that because of we see a lot of these new so-called socialist publications on the internet, and a way they get themselves big is by exploiting their own workforce.
Exactly.
Not paying or buying a company, buying an aging unit out in like England and then firing all the staff the next month. And so, how are we going to deal with that? I mean, because that's what I feel is one of the biggest problems we have on the left right now. The faux left, as I like to call it.
The faux left, yeah. Well, for instance, our uh, our North American Administrative Office in Chicago has a staff union.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, anybody needs workplace protection in the form of some kind of formal union agreement,
Mm-hmm.
or an informal one that's enforced with a lot of direct action. But I think as long as you have any kind of um, exploitative opportunity, if there's a profit motive, somebody is going to try to take advantage of it, exploit it. and that's unfortunate. I have to say that because of a long history of the kind of work that I've done with my union and just working on the ground with the local scene and so forth, I don't pay a lot of attention to a lot of those other types of publications.
Mm.
I certainly see them and access them here and there from different references I get from other people, but I wasn't aware that this was one of the trends that was going on. It's very sad to hear that.
Oh, it is. And the problem is that because they are so decentralized as these magazines now are, they're everyone's a spec writer. It's hard to unionize unless the writers themselves unionize. All the spec writers unionize themselves and say, "Look, you're now going to deal with us this way, and we'll tell you how much the price is," which is possible.
Well,
I mean, the IWW could do that.
yeah, and again, we do have that freelance
Mm-hmm.
writers group that has been making some progress. Um, and here's another thing: whether you identify with a certain union or not, um, you can create your own union
Yes, you can.
uh, in the most decentralized way that you want to, and um, you know, Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act is the concerted activity clause,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the most important one. If two people get together in the workplace and start to work for mutual protection, then they have all the legal right in the world. Now, employers are very good at firing people for trying to organize in even the most minuscule way. But that Section 7 thing should be taken very seriously by people. It's one of the most important parts of the legal aspect of
Mm-hmm.
organizing that people don't pay attention to.
No, you're absolutely right. But on the other hand, when you're working in a corporation, because there's only two of you, you can easily be isolated out, as you said, and
That's
fire.
it's absolutely right. And then we get down to methods.
And so that means that, realistically, you kind of have to join a larger group so that you have some external pressure points on the on large corporations.
Or the organization, the organizing work sometimes happens a lot slower than you want it to. But if you approach it from, and it sounds a little hoity-toity to say this, but if you approach it from a more of a scientific level,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's about analyzing who the players are, um, getting actually rating them.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are more friendly to the idea than others, and you have to know who to work on first and who to work on last before you try to actually go forward with a formal organizing drive. And so the successes and the failures of the past efforts, have a lot to say about the predictability of union organizing drives and how they develop.
Well, that's certainly true. And I mean, I wouldn't avoid scientifically approaching the union drive because, I mean, it's the most effective to look who are the natural leaders in the workplace. If we can get them, obviously more people will follow you than if you get somebody who's isolated and iced out. He or she is not the person really to follow. But what I was getting at is that when you're freelance on the internet, especially, it's very easy to ice out. Even if there's two people working together, you just don't accept their submissions anymore, and you basically blackball them. And what are you gonna say? Well, we just didn't like it in the writing. So how is the union affecting change internally in these organizations that will maybe be more acceptable to freelance writers coming in, being unionized, and saying, okay, well, we can't do that anymore.
I think the honest answer up front is that it's slow yet,
Mm-hmm.
but building critical mass among people that are freelancers or
Mm-hmm.
other unconnected workers. There's so many workers that are not connected to a formal workplace. And so the organizing strategies have to adapt to the modern conditions, and we're still learning a lot about how best to do that. I'm not sure what all the specifics are at this point, but I can tell you that at least among freelancers, my experience was that there wasn't a lot of connectedness. Um, I knew a couple of other local freelancers when
Hmm.
I was in the National Writers Union, and when I mentioned it to them, they were very much resistant. They felt like that would jeopardize some of the work that they were already doing. And I felt like, well, I understand your point, but in the long run, what are you going to do? You're going to keep having to accept, less desirable conditions to stay busy.
Exactly. I mean, when a large newspaper is going to pay you like $15 for an article that a year ago they were paying $100 for, that's not in your best advantage.
No, and a lot of small publications are are just not worth spending your time with and trying to develop your career with as a writer,
Well,
because they just don't provide any kind of pay at all. It's just
or reach.
or reach.
I mean, it's not nice to say, but if you write for a new publication, you need to have that reach, so that when you if you move to another group, people are familiar with who you are and will read your articles. I mean,
Yep.
so reach is a huge thing. I mean, it's part of the way that some of these online publications try to, well, we're not paying you up front, but we got 70,000 subscribers. Then you find out that 10,000 of them are bots they bought last week
Hmm.
to fool their subscribers into thinking that they're much larger, and therefore you should pay the $29.99. And
Yeah. It's the same. I'm a member of SAG-AFTRA, and I'm not busy working in the entertainment industry, but I do occasionally do a gig. And as somebody who has done some voice work, I don't know if you're familiar with the way that a lot of uh, companies are now hiring voice talent, but they do it on spec over the internet.
mhm.
You record all your own material. You never go into a recording studio anymore, and you might record 15 or 20 pieces of copy, little 10-second, 30-second things. Some of them, but you don't get paid for any of them unless they accept them.
Sometimes you don't always own them either. Sometimes they can use them for promotional purposes.
It's called stealing your work.
That is. I love that when you go on like an internet website, it says, yes, you can post everything you want, but we own it all at the end of the day. Yeah.
You know,
That's been the big
how,
internet
how many
steal.
how many times are you going to take a boot in the ass before you get it?
Well, that's surprising. I mean, think about how many people use Twitter and they don't realize that all that content they generate there, once they put it on Twitter, they no longer are the sole licensees of it. They've given it all away.
Yeah, watch what you say.
I mean, same with TikTok and YouTube. Their license agreement allows them to use whatever they want
Hmm.
as marketing material.
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, that's been the big. I mean that everyone thinks that people are getting free stuff. I mean, yeah, it's not the people at the bottom of the ladder; it's the people at the top of the ladder that are getting the free stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've been paying out for years on the internet scam.
Well, it's not a very democratic uh, system as it was promoted to be. So
Hmm.
there's another there's another issue.
Yeah, I always liked that article. What was it? Kevin Kelly wrote about 10 years ago, more like 14. The 1,000 fans.
I'm not familiar with
You've
that
never
one.
read it? Well, he wrote it for Wired, and he came up with this idea that the beauty of the internet was not that the material that is most successful on the internet is not always generated by the most successful artists, but it's generated by the people that have the most successful base, right? So, you try and find people that'll buy, the 15th edition of your album or something, live and wherever. And so that's what you try to exploit. The fact that people are literally obsessed with you. It's obsession is what he's voting, is what he's telling you that you have to create a fan base. And then you start seeing that now the media the independent media providers on the internet are really buying into this idea. To be a member, like all my content's free. That's it. You just get it for free. I don't have levels. I don't have tiers. I do want to actually do some fundraising so I can start a news cooperative, but I'm finding it very hard. I only want to charge $2.50 a month, not $5. That's not $250. That's $2.50, like the price of a coffee. I literally based it on that. So I figured I needed like 25,000 members to make it work. But everyone should have a voice, and everyone should have be able to say what they want in it. But you go on and you look at these other people, and then they're like $1,200, and you get a free visit with me, and you start to realize that this is no longer about being independent. This is just another way of financing a very corrupt model of media.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, that's a sad testimony on what the internet has allowed some people to figure out another way to exploit other people by.
And I think it's dangerous when it comes to news.
Mm-hmm.
The commodification of news that these independent people are selling is that, you're a little bit better than the other guy if you give me $50, because I'll let you in on another little process of the news or operation. You'll get to tell me what articles you like. So I'm tailoring my material to you, to this group. And if you give me $1,500, then, you can come to all my live shows and and then talk to me in person. So, that's the same as, being GE and going to MSNBC and saying, look, I don't like that ad. Yeah. Get rid of that one.
Mm-hmm. And it happens all the time.
It does. How many stories do they really get to kill? Tons.
Yeah, well, the IWW has always been good at producing its own media. We did a newsletter for years around sweatshop issues and other economic exploitation. And, we used to go out every month and pass that newsletter out at some event that we created to picket at. Mm-hmm. And, I think we educated a lot of people about, what are they buying? What kind of clothes are they buying? What kind of retailers are they purchasing their clothes from? Those kinds of things.
Those are all very important things, and you always that always, when you bring this up, that always makes me laugh a little when you hear people say, "Well, people on the lower economic rungs, they can't handle. They're not interested in that. They just want what's cheapest." Well, they're forced to what's cheapest. Mm-hmm. That's not the same as not wanting. When you have X number of dollars, you only get to make X number of choices.
Well, and when the big box retailers push all the other independent stores or smaller chains out of the market, force them to close, you're stuck in no man's land with a Walmart next door. It's the only place you can get 3/4 of what you need to survive.
That's true.
But that's a sad testimony too.
That is. Have you been to Kingston lately?
No, I have not in the last couple of years.
Oh, we should go. Remember how about a decade ago, North Front Street in that area around, if you know Kingston at all? I know Kingston. I went to high school there. I went to high school there, actually. Okay. So North Front Street, when I was in high school, was totally dead. It was, like 3 stores, and every other building was going in and out of business. Now it's gentrified like you wouldn't believe. Mm. And that's the exact opposite. That's where you're still buying the same, stuff sometimes from the sweatshop. It's just priced a lot higher. And it's a guy from Brooklyn with tight pants on that tells you how great it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're seeing that, and now the malls that were so that were destroying them are now empty in Kingston, and it's this little like maybe a square mile that is just totally packed all year round on 3 days of the week. But that's it, just 3 days of the week. And people want to say, well, make a living. Well, how can you make a living at a shop that has 3 employees? 2 of them own it, and you're
Yeah.
the only other one working 3.5, 4 days a week.
No, believe me, I know. I haven't worked full time in many years. I got out of a job with a pension, uh, and I've worked a lot of odd jobs and doing some retail stuff, um, just casual time work as I could get it. But I had one retail job for 5 years, and there was nobody making. First of all, there was nobody making a living wage
Hmm.
other than the person who owned the business. And there were about 10 total employees in 2 small businesses side by side owned by the same person. That's not a good economic model for a local business.
Oh, it's terrible
Some,
income.
somebody else should have, a couple of other people should have been making a living in that store, but it's just
I would say 10
poor
people.
planning, poor planning, competition from larger retailers. The whole economic system is just totally unjust on all levels.
Well, the race to the bottom is the biggest problem we have. You know.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a it's about the democracy part. To
Hmm.
me, if workers had more say,
Oh,
then
definitely.
all of these decisions would be up for grabs.
But you have to admit that even if you had a fully democratic workplace, once they started doing, like NAFTA,
Mm-hmm.
you were, it's hard to compete.
It's true. It's
I
true.
mean, if your competition is willing to cut the price down because he moves to, Mexico and build everything, you're in trouble. And that's, that was the beauty, that was the whole point of NAFTA.
Well, as Bill Haywood said about 100 and some years ago, what world capital needs to fight to fight against world capital, you need a world labor union.
You do. You
I
do.
mean,
And
I'm paraphrasing him, but
no, you're
uh,
absolutely right. I mean, that's the big thing.
conceptually,
Yeah, of course, you have to equal those two scales out, right? So that Mexico doesn't look as good as the U.S., and
hmm
then you start seeing real parity
right.
between people, and we just don't have that, and we don't have a lot of things apparently right now. So so we covered that. I think the only thing we should cover before we leave is what's going on with the railroad strikes right now, since they're still pretty
Yeah.
relevant.
One of the difficulties with the rail labor situation is most of the unions were not fully engaged in a more militant stance.
Mhm.
However, a majority of the union membership in the rail industry did vote against the contract that they were saddled with. It's
Hmm.
just that a majority of the 12 craft unions didn't. So there's a big distinction there. Um, there's been no formal word yet on further actions, but I sense that there will be something happening again soon. Um, so keep your eyes and ears open. I
Uh,
will certainly be involved in working on that with other folks locally because it is a primary issue as far as I'm concerned.
wow. Well, that's great to know. There's going to be more action going on, more sympathy strikes,
Yeah, again,
because they can't
nothing.
go on strike legally due to the 1926 Rail
No,
Act.
no. The Railway Labor Act is another way to keep people from exercising their rights in the workplace. And so, yeah, we're on pins and needles to find out what the next strategic move will be by
Oh,
the workers.
before we leave, we have to talk about the recent the upcoming SCOTUS on labor, which might put the cost of of strikes on the unions themselves.
Well, that would be. I feel two ways about it. That would be a huge problem in a lot of ways, but it would also, the way I look at it is that laws were meant to be broken, and that workers will always figure out a way um, to counter the moves by the established powers that be. We've always been more innovative and creative than they are. Um, Technology has complicated that, but working people have a lot of resourcefulness, and maybe it means that it leads to a more decentralized labor movement that's a little bit more footloose and fancy free like it used to be. And I don't mean to talk in romantic platitudes here, but I really do think that if that does happen, then the natural reaction will be to develop new strategies. We've got to become, I mean, we've got to become more militant in our attitudes toward what's happening to us in the workplace and in our economies.
Absolutely. I just don't think that I can see too many good strategies around that one. It's going to be pretty hard for, especially smaller unions that can't afford the, $100 billion loss. I mean, that's going to bankrupt unions. That's what the law is designed to do.
Well, I think we also have to think in terms of what is the reaction that workers should have to a workplace problem. A lot of times we only think in terms of um, if there's going to be a job action of any kind, they're going to walk out of the workplace. That's not always the best way to do it.
Oh no, you got slowdowns. You've got other tools at your.
And so the bigger unions have got to be able to be more flexible in their strategies, and they're not good at teaching their workers about some of these tactics. And that's the role that folks like us and my union and maybe other militant uh, caucuses and groups within the labor movement can help teach the existing workforce. The working class in this country has got to get more educated and got to get more militant about not only their attitude but their tactics.
I totally agree with that. I mean, we need to start going back. Maybe a sit down strike is a possibility now, again. Or during the last great train incident, the workers that literally took over the rails in 1877, and they collected the tolls, but you just maybe don't give them to the company just yet.
It's called a good work strike.
That's right.
Well, yeah, and I think
And they did that
think
because if they
there's
had stopped the mail, they would have gone to jail. But
right. No, and you've brought up a number of things. Obviously, you're someone who's studied the history of labor and working class struggles, and that's also an important piece, which helps provide perspective, and I think helps create a stronger working class identity. Um, most most people most people don't realize that they are actually working class anymore.
mhm,
And so, if you're a member of a class, that means you have an obligation
mhm,
to uphold that class's interest.
I
So,
agree.
what do you do then? And and so the history is important to understand who we are and where we came from, and hopefully where we're going.
I agree. Again, it was great speaking with you, and
My pleasure. Anytime you need us.
yeah, I would love to have you back on. I mean, probably in the summer we should talk again because that'll be when more things have happened across with Starbucks. The rails might be heating up again because we'll be getting to that time when it's the heavy shipping period.
No, just let me know, and I'd be glad to
I
hop
will.
on with you again.
Be great. Thank you. Again, this is Greg Giorgio of the IWW, and tonight, that'll be the end of our podcast.
Thanks again.
Oh, thank you.